The UFC offered him millions. A title shot. Even Brock Lesnar. So why did Fedor say no? What stopped the greatest heavyweight of all time from ever stepping into the octagon? The truth is wilder than you think. When the UFC tried to bring Fedor Emelianenko into the fold, they weren't just negotiating with a fighter, they were negotiating with an entire power structure behind him. According to Joe Rogan, Fedor wasn't just repped by agents or lawyers like most fighters. His negotiations were reportedly handled by very rough men, hard-edged Russians with reputations that made even seasoned MMA executives uneasy. These weren't your typical sports managers. They were described as gangster-type characters, bringing an intimidating presence into every room they entered. Dana White, known for his no-nonsense alpha dog style, wasn't about to be... The vibes in those meetings weren't just tense, they were hostile. At one point, things got so intense that Dana reportedly had to increase his personal security. Think about that. The president of the UFC, a guy who's dealt with all kinds of fighters. Managers in corporate suits felt the need to beef up protection after dealing with Fedor's camp. That alone speaks volumes about the kind of pressure and unease those meetings must have created. And yet, in the midst of it all, Dana still wanted Fedor badly. But the Russian goons, as Rogan put it, weren't just demanding a contract. They were allegedly asking for a cut of the UFC's money, possibly even equity-level perks, something unheard of in UFC negotiations. This wasn't just business. It was a clash of power, ego, and street-level toughness. Team came in expecting to dictate terms. Dana White, the ultimate control freak, wasn't about to let anyone punk him in his own house. In the end, it wasn't just the numbers or the perk, it was the threatening tone and power dynamics that helped sink the deal. A true Cold War moment in MMA history, with two empires refusing to bow. There's one thing that makes Dana White break out in hives. It's the idea of sharing the spotlight. So when Fedor Emelianenko's team came to the negotiating table, they didn't just want money or matchmaking guarantees. They came with a demand that was unthinkable. In UFC history, we want M1 Global to co-promote with the UFC. Let that sink in. Co-promotion in Dana White's UFC? It's like walking into the Vatican and demanding your own altar next to the Pope. Fedor, at the time, wasn't just a fighter. He was the Conor and Golden Goose of M1 Global, a Russian MMA promotion trying to make a global splash. His management didn't just see the UFC as a platform, they saw it as a vehicle to elevate their own brand. They wanted M1 Global's logo on UFC posters, their executives at press conferences, their stake in the profits. But UFC had just finished absorbing Pride and WEC. They were in consolidation mode, building a singular global empire, not looking to hand out brand equity to outsiders let alone. A Russian promotion with mob rumors swirling and unfamiliar faces in suits calling the shots? To the UFC, this wasn't just a weird business request, it was a direct challenge to their dominance. Dana White has always said the UFC is about the fighters, not the promotions. In his mind, letting M1 Global onto the same marquee would open the door to chaos every manager. Every fighter with a side hustle, asking for the same deal. It was a line in the sand. No co-promotion, period. But for Fedor's team, that wasn't negotiable. They wanted control, influence, and visibility. They didn't want to hand their star over without lifting their brand with him. So instead of Fedor walking out to the octagon under the UFC lights, we got an unshakable standoff. UFC standing tall as the industry titan, and M1 Global refusing to bend. In the end, Fedor's ownership turned him from a top free agent into a deal breaker. A rare case where business pride overruled fight hype, and we never got to see the last emperor inside the octagon. The UFC knew what it had in front of them. Fedor Emelianenko, the last emperor, the undefeated Russian juggernaut, the man who mowed through legends and pride like they were amateurs. So when Dana White set his sights on signing him, he didn't come with chump change. He came with a bag. $2 million per fight. Upfront, guaranteed. An immediate UFC heavyweight title shot. Against Brock Lesnar. In a stadium? This was no ordinary pitch. This was the UFC rolling out the red carpet, fireworks included. The idea was to book Fedor versus Lesnar at a TNT stadium in Texas, home of the Dallas Cowboys. It wasn't just a super fight, it was a combat sports spectacle, something that could have rivaled Mayweather versus McGregor in hype if it landed at the right time. Fedor, stoic as always, didn't bite. His team, however, did more than pass. They countered with more control, more demands, and more strings attached. They wanted co-promotion. They wanted M1 Global's name on everything. They wanted partnership, not employment. But from the UFC's point of view, that $2 million was the most they'd ever offered anyone at that time. It was unprecedented. Even Lesnar, who was pulling PPV numbers through the roof, didn't walk in with that kind of deal. Dana thought this was it. Done deal. Instead, it became the moment the dream collapsed. The UFC brass was stunned. Fedor's team basically said thanks, but no thanks. We want more, not just money, but power. And so the fantasy match Fedor Emelianenko versus Brock Lesnar, the stoic Russian Terminator versus the WWE turned him MMA wrecking ball died before it ever got signed. MMA fans would go on to endlessly debate who would V1, the granite chin and sambo of Fedor, or the freak strength and wrestling pressure of Lesnar. We'll never know. But one thing is certain. $2 million and a title shot wasn't enough to overcome the deeper demands behind Fedor's team. Instead of a pay-per-view war in Texas, we got an empty slot in the UFC history books and a fight that still echoes as one of the biggest what-ifs in MMA. After Pride collapsed in 2007, it felt like the world's best fighters were flooding into the UFC. Rampage, Shogun, Crow Cop, they all made the jump. Fans were waiting for one more name to cross over. Fedor Emelianenko. He was the guy. The undefeated Russian icon. The man who ragdolled monsters like Big Nog, Crow Cop, and Mark Coleman without breaking a sweat. The consensus #1 heavyweight in the world. But then nothing. Instead of signing with the UFC, Fedor went a different route. Strikeforce, Affliction, and eventually Bellator. These were solid promotions, but let's be honest, they weren't the UFC. So why? Because for Fedor and his team, it was never just about belts or big names. It was about autonomy. In organizations like Strikeforce and Bellator, Fedor got what he wanted. Full control over opponents, dates, marketing, and most importantly, how M1 Global fit into the picture. In the UFC, he would have been just another fighter on the roster. In Strikeforce, he was the centerpiece. They built events around him. His logo was on the mat. His people were in the room. Fedor didn't need the UFC to stay relevant. He made the fight world come to him. Some say it was about comfort sticking to promoters who treated him with reverence. Others believe he and his team feared the UFC's rigid structure would strip them of their leverage. And let's be real, Dana White wasn't shy about trashing Fedor when negotiations failed. He's calling him overrated and a middleweight at times. Not exactly an olive branch. Fedor once said himself that Dana White hated him. Whether it was personal or political, the vibes were off. So instead of walking into the octagon, Fedor carved out a legacy on his own terms. Sure, he missed out on UFC gold, but he built his own legend, untouched by UFC matchmaking, preserved in mystique. In a sport filled with fighters begging for UFC deals, Fedor was the rare God-tier talent who walked away from it. Alan still became one of the greatest to ever do it. Behind the calm, ice-cold demeanor of Fedor Emelianenko, behind the signature cross and quiet humility, there's always been a storm of rumors, shadows, and speculation. From the start, the whispers were there. The Russian Mafia had a hand in guiding Fedor's career. While nothing's ever been proven, the stories never stopped swirling. Joe Rogan himself said it plainly. Fedor was controlled by some Russian people who were very rough men gangster-type characters. These weren't just rumors of influence. They were stories of powerful men pulling strings, standing between Fedor and a UFC contract. Dana White, a guy who doesn't back down from anything, allegedly had to increase his security after negotiating with them. Think about that. The guy who talks trash to entire weight divisions felt the need to watch his back when dealing with Fedor's crew. It paints a picture of a fighter who wasn't entirely in control of his own destiny, an emperor surrounded by warlords. Some fans believe these mysterious forces kept Fedor away from the UFC not because he didn't want to go, but because they couldn't afford to give up control. In the UFC, contracts are ironclad. There are no shady deals, no backroom slices of pay-per-view. It's all above board. For Fedor's team, the UFC may have been more than just business. It may have been a threat to their entire grip on the brand. And here's where things get legendary. Fedor's absence from the UFC turned him into the ultimate MMA what-if. It became a myth. a ghost that haunted the heavyweight division. Every time a UFC heavyweight champ was crowned, fans would ask, yeah, but could he beat Fedor, the Russian enigma? The man who never chased the spotlight, yet couldn't escape it. The emperor who ruled from the shadows. No octagon, no Dana White handshake. It's just a string of highlight reel finishes, a quiet stare, and a legacy draped in mystery.